Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. My guest today is Colin Worth from the YouTube channel This Does Not Compute. He is a regular friend of the show. We always have a blast talking. It's hard to rein it in because we can talk for literally hours. Anyways, on this show, we're going to reminisce about recording technology of years gone by and even end up with the state of modern music recording. So without further ado, let's just dive right into the conversation. It's a fun one. Colin, thank you for coming on Geek Therapy Radio yet again. I just saw that you uploaded a new video to your YouTube channel today as of recording, and of course, it piqued my interest. It was a multi-track recorder, and I love anything multi-track recording, especially if it's from the 80s or 90s. Can you tell us a little bit in brief, just to get things started here, what the video was about?
Well, yeah, I love multi-track recording too, but what I love even more than multi-track recording is mini disc. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what kind of the crux of the video was about. I knew about this particular unit for a while, but I picked it up not too long ago from a local used music store after I saw it pop up on their website, and I needed it as a kind of a prop, or for B-roll footage for a completely different video. Mm-hmm. But just playing around with this thing just brought back so many memories of both multi-track recording, not on a computer, right, and also using mini disc, that I just felt really compelled to just, I got to get a video out about this thing. Yeah. And it didn't hurt that the unit came with a couple of discs that already had, shall we say, sample material already on them to demo with. Mm-hmm. So it was, the video is about a half an hour long, and it's kind of a combination of talking about this particular unit. It's a Sony MDM X4. It's a 4-track, multi-track, mini disc kind of standalone unit. Doesn't hook up to your computer. No, computerized workflow, keyboard or mouse or anything like this. It's really like they took one of the old school, cassette-based Porta Studios and kind of scaled it up, but it's digital for its recording. And it's based on mini disc. And it's based on mini disc. Data mini disc. Which means you get, data mini disc, which pros and cons. Mm-hmm. The upside to doing that was you just get amazing sound quality. Yeah. The vast majority of people, they'd be hard pressed to tell the difference between mini disc and CD quality. Just like, the vast majority of average listeners can't tell the difference between like a really good quality MP3 or Spotify or whatever from a CD. So you just get this immense step up in quality. There is like no noise floor to it. Mm-hmm. Plus, you get all of the really cool digital editing features. Oh, really? And I went through some of them in that video. Mm-hmm. Like punch in, punch out recording, automated punch in, punch out, where you're not, waiting for the tape to hit the right mark, and then you're stabbing the track arm button and doing your solo, and then quick turning it off again before you overwrite something that you wanted to keep. Right. It's this kind of bridge device where you're starting to get into a non-linear workflow. Right. So it's just this really interesting unit where anyone who had old school analog multi-track recording experience would be really comfortable getting into it. Right. Because it's going to be a very familiar layout and workflow if you want to work that way. But it also really gives you a taste of where things were going with the ability to, have the audio be stopped or paused and then just scrub through it frame by frame until you hit an edit point. And one part that I didn't get into the video, really just for time, is so you can do punch in, punch out recording, but you can also clip and move sections of audio on a per track basis. Interesting. That's what I was thinking. I was hoping you were going to mention that. That's really cool. You could do that with regular consumer, stereo mini disc on like a consumer recorder. Like if you wanted to split a track, you could do that. but it would do the entire audio. So it would do both left and right.
Right.
With this thing, you could, and there's like really good examples in the owner's manual. I linked to the owner's manual in the description of the video. They've got a lot of really good information in there explaining what you can do with this unit. Their example was, let's say you decide you want to flip verses 1 and 2 for your vocal track in a song.
Yeah.
You just split them, just the vocal track, none of the instruments or anything else,
right,
and just flip them.
Yeah.
I mean, you just take that section of audio for vocal 2, you put it where vocal 1 was, and you move vocal 1 over and done.
That's so
and it's
cool.
It's completely digital, it's completely non-linear, and it's non-destructive. You can just flip it back if you didn't like it. You can undo the whole thing.
Right. The miracle of non-linear editing made available to the home recordist, basically, back when did this thing come out? Mid-90s-ish, would you say, maybe?
So the build date on my particular machine is like May of 97, but
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it dates back to something like 95-ish.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, you're thinking 25 years old that they were able to do that powerful of editing.
Right.
Plus, the other thing I really didn't get into with this was MIDI control.
Right. Triggering other MIDI devices.
Wow. Yeah. And I didn't have it available for me when I shot the episode, but apparently this thing only sold for like $1,200 brand new.
Right. Which I mean
was, in 95, that's a lot of money.
Right.
But that's still way cheaper than a PC and all the cards and equipment you would need to do multi-track, on a computer.
Right. So in the year 2001, I believe it was, I vividly remember one of my best friends in high school, Adam, he got a Fostex digital 8-track, which recorded to, I want to say, MMC, early MMC, like a 16, what was it? It wasn't that much memory, but it was digital. Oh, it was a built-in hard drive. It was like a built-in 30 gigabyte IDE hard drive. And when he got that thing, and remember, this is like 2001, it absolutely blew our freaking minds. We thought that my friend's garage had turned into an actual recording studio. We put up the carpet padding up on the walls, and we would go over there maybe four days a week at least after school and just record stuff, and it was all horrible at the time. We thought it was great, like, well, man, we're musicians, like, we're rock stars, this is perfect, we're making CD quality recordings just in your garage. It was unheard of, because all we had used before that were analog cassette 4-tracks, and not good cassette 4-tracks. And speaking of 4-tracks, this radio show was 4 segments, and this is the end of the first segment. Colin, stay on with me. We're going to continue in the second segment. You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Hope you're enjoying it. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. During the break, check out geektherapyradio.com for more information. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Colin from the YouTube channel This Does Not Compute, go check it out, is my guest again today, longtime friend of the show. And we're going to pick up the conversation about recording technology through the years with my checkered history with 4-track cassette recorders. Like like Porta Studio 01 or something like that, really cheap. And we didn't know what we were doing, so we didn't know how to record it effectively to tape and blah, blah, blah. There are 4-tracks out there that you can get exquisite sound quality from. I have a Tascam 644 and a Tascam 688, which the 688 squeezes 8 individual audio tracks onto a standard 1/4-inch cassette tape. And through the miracle of DBX noise reduction, it sounds actually incredible. And it has a MIDI output and input and throughput too. That's called a 688 MIDI Studio. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit about it, but you touched a chord here with the early kind of in-home multi-track recording. And I wanted to ask you being a musician yourself, whether it's dabbling or professional or whatever, I think you're probably on par with my dabblings in music. But what was the first recording device that you used? Was it a 4-track cassette recorder, or did you get into music later on and start recording into, acid music or Cakewalk home studio edition? What was your first foray into recording music?
So I've never really been into recording music that I myself have produced. Mm-hmm. I've always been more interested in the engineering side of it.
Right. Yes.
Whether that's live audio or studio recording or recording live audio.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say probably the very first time I ever really recorded anything that wasn't just like off the radio or off a CD, just home consumer dubbing, anything beyond that was probably just to a regular like 2-track cassette recorder.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably something like a band concert in school.
Yeah.
Setting up a couple of microphones and trying to get that all going. I mean, I have some memories of when I was in high school. I think it was a freshman. We took a band trip down to New Orleans.
Oh.
For it was like 3 days or something like that.
Were you living in Minnesota?
And it was kind of a tour. Like we stopped in St. Louis and played at like all these kind of other random schools along the way.
Right. From Minnesota.
From Minnesota, yeah, the Twin Cities, kind of all the way down. So it took us like 2 days to get down to New Orleans. This was late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And we, the New Orleans part was kind of sightseeing and learning about the city's history, but also some performances as well.
Right.
And I can't remember the name of the joint, but it was in the French Quarter.
The joint.
It was one of those. I know, right? I'm old.
Yeah.
I don't know what Gen Zers would call a place.
The joint is cool.
I mean, it really was a joint because it was one of those like dinner theater kind of places, but it wasn't theater, but rather it was like jazz groups that would come in.
Yeah, yeah.
So everyone, the audience would be sitting there eating dinner and these jazz groups would come through.
Yeah, cool.
And they set it up so that we could be the openers, or the first act. And apparently
cool,
the groups would get a little rowdy or whatever, at least, relative to a bunch of, high schoolers later on in the night. So it was kind of all of us band geeks would eat dinner first, at like 6 o'clock or whatever.
Yeah.
And the jazz band kids would go up and play.
Cool.
And I was in jazz band, but we only had something like a half an hour to perform.
That was your set.
And none of the songs that I played on were ones that they picked.
Okay.
So I never got to play at the joint. But I remember thinking right before they went on, like literally 5 or 10 minutes before they went on, I remember thinking, dude, I should record this.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to go grab, because we were bringing a full PA system with us, because we just didn't know what places we'd be performing in would, have any sort of sound reinforcement.
Yeah, totally.
And so I had stashed a tape deck in the rack with the mixer and the amp and everything. It was kind of an all-in-one rack.
Yeah.
And I had brought a couple of smaller, like pencil mics for doing ambience recording.
Yeah, cool.
And I remember thinking, like 10 minutes before they went on, dude, I should record this.
Yeah.
And so I grabbed one of my buddies who also wasn't performing, and I'm like, let's go back and grab all that stuff.
Right.
And so we literally run as fast as we can, probably 6 blocks to where they had to park the bus.
Yeah.
Get on the bus. We looked at the rack thinking we are not going to haul this sucker back 6 blocks because it probably weighed 80 pounds, right?
Yeah, and you might get mugged too.
Yeah. So I quick ripped the tape deck out of the rack, grabbed one of the mics and a cable, because the tape deck had a mic preamp on it. It was kind of a crappy one, but it was better than nothing, right?
Yeah.
So I grabbed this tape, and it was like a consumer grade tape deck. It was just a standard 2-track.
Do you remember what brand? What model?
Oh, it was probably like a Tascam or a TIAC or something.
Okay. Yeah.
Not a terribly high-end one by any means. It might have even been my own. I can't remember. Well, it might have even been my own tape deck, but...
Okay. So you got a tape deck with a mic pre on it.
So we got the tape deck, and it had a mic input on it. No, it had a mic input on it, so it wasn't my own, because mine was even lower end than that. Anyway, tape deck, mic input on it, grab a mic, grab a cable, book it all the way back. I find the front of house tech. I ask her, can you get me a mic stand? And she comes out with just a regular straight stick mic stand. I'm like, that's perfect. So I throw the mic on there. I stash the tape deck under a table. I couldn't get the mic close up to the band. because of the way that they had everything set up. So the mic is kind of in the back of the room.
Yeah.
And it's also where they're serving. So like throughout this recording, you get the random clink of silverware and them throwing dishes in the
Yeah, I was going to say, I see where this is going. You hear all the wait staff and everything happening, and then just some little toots of horns.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely getting some ambiance, let's say.
Yeah.
But I managed to do it just in time. I got everything rigged up and hit record like 10 seconds before they started performing.
Cool.
And so I got that whole thing, which was kind of fun.
Yeah.
That was probably my first memory. After that, the school managed to buy a couple of used Alesis ADAT decks.
So
hold remember
on.
Those?
Yes, I do. Yes. Before we go to the Alesis, can I ask you real quick, did the joint sound tech have a soundboard that you could have taken an auxiliary send from to, get a feed right from the board to the tape machine, or you just wanted to really set up the microphone in the kitchen yourself?
I'm sure that was an option, but they didn't have the entire band mic'd up.
Okay.
It was a small enough place where, let's just say, the seating area was maybe 4 times the size of the stage.
Right.
This was not a big area. So what they had for sound built in was really just for vocal performances. The band itself wasn't amplified.
Right. I see what you're saying.
So trying to figure that out, and with just how little time I had, my mind just wasn't there. My mind was get anything down to tape as quickly as I could and not try to go for technical perfection. I would have loved to have done something better, but it is what it is.
Right. Did you at the time have a crush, and were they with you on the trip, distracting you?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. So we can talk about a mutual crush now, that Alesis ADAT. What do you want to tell me about the ADAT?
Well, I don't know if I had a crush on the ADAT. It was okay. It was okay. I mean, back during that time, and ADAT was like really the professional format, one of 2.
Right.
The other one was from Tascam. So Alesis was an 8-track. It was all digital. It was truly CD quality. So it was uncompressed audio, 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz. The interesting thing about it is that it used basically VHS cassettes as its recording medium. And technically, you're supposed to use super VHS tapes because they held up better, because you were going to be doing a lot of rewinding and fast forwarding.
Right. And I think technically 16 or 24-bit and up to 48K.
The later ones did let you go up.
And we'll take a very short break right there. Very, very short if you're listening to the podcast. Grab the Geek Therapy Radio podcast on the iHeartRadio app or your favorite podcast player. And we will be right back with more GTR and Colin from This Does Not Compute. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. And remember, I talked about the podcast going into the last break. That podcast is fresh and new 5 days a week. So subscribe to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. Look for the red, black, and white color scheme, and you'll be good to go. You can also go to geektherapyradio.com for merch and more information, and the way to contact me right there on the homepage. It's the very first thing you see. I would love to hear about your geek thing. So go to geektherapyradio.com and get at me. You can also get at me, so to speak, on Twitter, Geek Therapy Radio on Twitter, Geek Therapy Radio on YouTube, and Geek Therapy Radio on Instagram. Again, just look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and we're good to go. All right, let's continue the conversation with Colin from the YouTube channel This Does Not Compute. I believe we were talking about ADATs. Any of you musicians remember recording to ADAT in the 90s? Oh, anyways, let's get back into it.
So we had a pair. We had 2 of those units. So we had a total of 16 tracks.
Nice.
And you could link them.
Yep.
So
daisy
you
chain
could
them.
use, you could kind of daisy chain from like a control perspective.
Right.
And you had the choice of 2 remote controls. You had the LRC and the BRC.
Yep.
The
Little and
LRC
big.
was the little remote control.
Yeah.
It was the size of like a smartphone maybe, but it had just basic physical buttons on for fast forward, rewind, stop, record, pause.
Right.
And then if you wanted to arm tracks for recording, you had to stab those buttons on the front of the unit.
Yeah.
If you wanted to see the time code on it, you had to look at the screen on the front of the unit. That was the LRC. The BRC was definitely what the professional studios bought. That was the big remote control, and it pretty much duplicated everything that was available on the front panel of the ADAT into this larger unit.
It was the size of a tablet, more or less.
It was a bit bigger than that, but yeah, that was kind of the idea. It was intended to be like on its own stand, kind of off to the side from your mixing console. So you think like a big professional studio, you've got this giant analog board, and then tucked in the back corner, normally you'd have like a big 2-inch tape multitrack.
Right.
The idea was, their selling point was, you'd rip the tape multitrack out, you'd throw a small rack in there, throw a bunch of these ADAT decks, and then the LRC would, or the BRC rather, would sit off to like your right side between the output section of the mixer and that rack.
Right.
So you'd have everything like right there, you know, and you could arm all the tracks. I think it supported 32 tracks on it.
That sounds...
I think you could do up to four of these ADAT units.
Right. That sounds about right.
Hooked up, something like that. And it would have a screen on there just for time code. And I mean, you could do everything from the BRC.
So
we didn't have that. We had the LRC, the little one, because all this equipment was used. We couldn't have possibly afforded brand new.
Right. So real quick, I'm gonna jump off here in a few minutes and do something. But Jagged Little Pill, Alanis Morissette, that whole album was recorded on Alesis ADAT.
A lot of albums from the early to mid 90s were recorded to ADAT. And the other format was from Tascam, and it was pretty much like a direct competitor. It could do everything ADAT did. It had the same form factor. The only difference was, instead of VHS cassettes, it used 8mm like high 8 tapes.
Exactly.
Like you'd use in your camcorder. And some famous albums were recorded on that format as well. James Taylor's Hourglass was recorded. Actually, that whole album, for coming out in, 95, the entire album was done digitally.
Yeah.
Digital mixing, digital mastering, and digitally recorded to Tascam. The DA88, I think, was the most popular deck
I had one
in that lineup.
Yep. I had a DA88. It didn't work, and I never fixed it. But I had a DA88, and it was I just liked it. Even if it didn't work, I liked having it in my rack, just so that musicians and clients would come over and be like, "Can we use that?" First of all, you don't want to use that. Second of all, it doesn't work. I mean, I've got Pro Tools right here. There's no reason to use the DA88 or any ADAT. That doesn't mean that I don't want it, and I wouldn't love to have 24 channels of ADAT just to have 24 channels of ADAT, even if it takes up 4 square feet of the recording studio versus a laptop.
And those decks were not reliable either. I mean, they're basically glorified VCRs, right?
Yep. I was going to bring,
You didn't want to haul them around, and we ended up kind of hauling ours around a little bit. We ended up sticking them in that rack, not on that New Orleans trip, but later on. And that was kind of where I ended up going from that initial cassette recording. When we would do the occasional like jazz band gig in town, I'd haul 1 or 2 of the ADATs with, and try to get at least 4 or 6 channels of recording into that.
Right.
And then over the summer, I was able to borrow those units, take them home, set them up in the basement, and do kind of a real basic mix down of what we had recorded.
So what would you mix down to, cassette or CD? Maybe, did you have a CD burner at that time?
I did not at that time. What I ended up doing was actually bouncing everything to 2 tracks on ADAT.
Okay, yeah.
And then there was a guy that the band director knew who was a professional, in quotation marks, engineer who could do mastering and all that. So he had an ADAT deck. And so I basically bounced everything down to 2 tracks and gave the tape to him
to master.
And then he went through and mastered, in quotation marks, this audio, AKA what he did is he just put a bunch of reverb on it and said, that's good enough.
Normalized
and then
it
burned that to CD for me.
Yeah. And he would have normalized it if you were lucky. Have you ever done much mastering?
Not nearly enough.
Okay.
I've done some for part of like my YouTube content creation. I mean, obviously, like when I'm doing audio on camera or a voiceover or even a podcast like this,
for sure,
I'm not just going to take the raw audio that goes into the microphone, gets recorded to a file and drop it into my video editor. I mean, you know, I go through noise gate, I give it some compression.
Yeah.
That's, you know, sometimes some basic EQ. But in terms of like a multi-track kind of setup, there's some stuff I know, there's some stuff I don't know. I know the trend. I mean, it used to be where like the person in charge of mixing would get everything down to 2 tracks.
Yeah.
And then they'd hand that off to the mastering engineer, and the mastering engineer would basically, their job, like, and we're talking like decades ago, their job was really just to prepare the audio to get put on its final medium.
Right, for production.
Right, because you had to tweak it for vinyl versus cassette versus CD.
Exactly.
And you know, get the track markers and all that kind of stuff. Like if it was vinyl, you had to figure out which songs would be side A versus side B.
Right.
Cassette, same thing. Or right, like all that. Since we moved into the digital era where that doesn't matter anymore, my understanding is that the mastering engineer has a lot more to do with the final kind of quality of the sound, to the point where mix engineers won't necessarily just do a 2-track master. They maybe will do a 2-track master kind of as a reference for the mastering engineer to kind of get an idea as to what they're going for. But they'll also supply what are called stems.
Yeah.
So it'll be all of the drums mixed together as a stereo pair, but separate from the vocals, separate from the background vocals, separate from the bass and the guitars and all that.
Yeah.
And then the mastering engineer will go through and kind of do that final assembly, plus any EQ and compression, and these days compressing the hell out of it. And
my goodness, the loudness wars.
And all that.
But, you know, without getting too much on an audiophile sidetrack here, the loudness wars for those who don't know, the loudness wars was basically something that ramped up during the 90s and 2000s, where mastering engineers, to compete with other louder artists and stuff, would basically push that limiter to the absolute limit to get everything, including a little quiet flute part, just smashed all the way up to the loudest it could possibly be through some hard brick wall limiting. And what it wound up doing was everything was just loud, but nothing had anything dynamic. There was no interesting dynamic range to kind of keep you involved in the music. It was all just loud. And when it's all just loud, it kind of becomes white noise, which is why if you're listening to an album from the late 90s, early 2000s-ish, you know, a heavy metal album that is just balls to the walls loud, I can fall asleep to it rather easily because it's just one consistent volume. It's not engaging my brain dynamically. It's not engaging my ears dynamically. But that's kind of changed now, I've noticed recently, with the massive uptick in popularity with vinyl. So now those mastering engineers, you can a good vinyl versus a bad vinyl. The bad vinyl was it's just literally pressed from the digital master. That's, you know, they mastered it for MP3, they mastered it for Spotify and stuff, and they basically just take the CD and put it on vinyl,
press play on the CD and press record on the engraver and just let it go.
which doesn't work because of right angles and clipping, and it just doesn't work. So now there's artists like John Mayer and I'm sure others who have vinyl in mind as an end, you know, product that they want to release.
And as a result, we're getting more dynamics in mastering again. We're going to pause the conversation right there. We'll be back for one more segment of GTR. Don't go anywhere. Check out geektherapyradio.com during the break. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Remember to check out geektherapyradio.com for more information. Also, Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all that good stuff.
Colin, my guest, also has a YouTube channel. This does not compute on YouTube. If you're just listening to the podcast, I'm sorry, this was a broadcast first. You have to catch the audience where they are, whenever they tune in. I know you all know all this, but it can't hurt to repeat it. Colin is my guest from the YouTube channel. This does not compute. And as usual, we get to talking about all things audio, usually old computers. We talked about PDAs and tablets and all sorts of stuff, but right now we're talking about vintage recording gear. We're talking about ADATs. We were talking about recording to mini discs, 4-track recorders to data mini discs. We started the conversation earlier in the show, and now we've moved on to vinyl and the mastering process. That the loudness wars have simmered down a bit since we have higher quality audio playback options now, and we don't need everything to blast our ears. The consumer is left to control the volume knob. Imagine that. But we got to talking about vinyls and mastering for vinyls, so we'll continue that conversation now. So yes, they do master for digital release. So you're going to hear that John Mayer album, for instance, on Spotify, mastered for digital to make it sound best as even a compressed MP3. But they're also going to master it separately, thank God, for vinyl. And the beautiful thing about that is, so when you buy a vinyl, you now have access most of the time to the digital version of that vinyl. So you can actually have your FLAC or lossless wave or whatever lossless audio file, but that was mastered for vinyl. So now you have the glorious dynamic range and everything sounds like it's in the room with you, and it blows your ears away with how good things sound. Because with vinyl, and when you master it for vinyl and such, you let the end consumer control the overall volume. What a novel idea where you let the person who buys the vinyl control how loud they want that album to be, versus the loudness wars where everything was crushed to 0 dB as much as digital would take before clipping, and it was all just loud. Even, and I'm just saying sensory wise, it's all just loud, like I mentioned.
Yeah, it's just all flat. And
noise.
What's interesting is I think even in the digital realm, things are getting better in that regard, strangely enough. And a lot of that is due to the way we consume music now. I mean, you think about it, the 90s, the early 2000s, how did people discover new music? Well, it was things like Napster, the radio, or hearing music on play, being played like in a store or something like that. The people producing the music had a vested monetary interest in trying to grab your attention. Right. And so that's how that loudness war really started. It was this kind of like arms race almost of just trying to make their song a little bit louder. If you can make your song a little bit louder when it comes on, it might catch people's attention. Well, of course, that's just going to keep escalating to the point where you've hit 0 dB. You cannot go any further. Yep. And now everything is just big, flat, yucky, ugly. And then they started changing the way they wrote music to try and catch people's attention, but that's another discussion. Right. These days, though, I don't mean to bash on your industry, but people are kind of moving away from radio as a music discovery. Right. People are taking that under their own control more and more, right? Like these days when I discover a new song, it's usually from some streaming service. Right. And the thing is, with the streaming service, especially if you're a paid subscriber, you've already paid your money. Right. It's not like, the radio where the music producers need to hook you in, knowing that they're not making any money by playing that song on the radio, or at least not very much. And the money that they would make would be you liking the song enough to go out to a record store and buying the album. Right. With streaming, it's almost like the music industry has kind of given up on album sales. Like they'll take the money if you want to give it to them. It's singles. But it's singles and it's streaming now. Right. And so by the time a song comes on Spotify, they've already made their money. Right. So who cares if the thing is any louder than the song that was on before? Right. And we'll start wrapping it up with this point. I do want to touch on what you meant by the difference in music production in terms of the new way people discover music.
right now, I believe that what the trend is you need to catch people, make the song interesting within the first like 10 to 15 seconds. It's something like that.
That's all media. That's not
Right.
just music.
Right, but it's
all me. I mean, look at all the YouTube videos that you've seen where the first 15 seconds have had nothing to do with the rest of the episode.
exactly. When we're in this digital on-demand era, you have to catch people's attention instantly. That's why you hear a lot of songs. You know, a song from the 70s would take 5 or 6 minutes, there even sometimes longer if it was a rock opera, to build up to what the song is about. You know, Bohemian Rhapsody changes a few times, and it's this whole long thing. But songs now, people aren't going to sit there and wait if they have the access to that next track button, click, click, click. So they need to have they need to grab you within those first few seconds, just like YouTube, just like any other on-demand streaming service. That's kind of the way music is written now. You need to get to the hook quick and get people hooked on the song quick, or else they're going to click next.
And that hook has to be really juicy. Otherwise, within the first minute and a half, people will bail. I mean, think about it. Like, if you're listening to music with a bunch of friends, how quickly people will like get to maybe just after the second chorus and then just be sick of the song and want to skip.
Right. Versus on a record, you'd have to get up across the room, go over there. And it was kind of like, you know what? I'm in my chair. I'm across the room. I'm just going to listen to this whole thing and play out. And it was a different way of consuming music. And neither method, I want to just wrap up with this. When enjoying music, there is no right or wrong way to do it. It's not that vinyl is just this all supreme being better way to listen to music, or it sounds better than CD. You and I have talked about this versus streaming or anything else. We can talk about sonic and the frequency spectrum and Nyquist frequencies and all that kind of stuff. It's all about just enjoying music. And I'm just happy that now we have the bandwidth, basically is what it boils down to now with high-speed internet, that songs don't have to be so digitally compressed anymore. I think iTunes used to be at like 160 kilobits per second.
iTunes AAC file started out at 128 kilobit.
Right, and now it's like 256 is the standard or something, which is great. It's a higher bit rate.
Like to your point earlier about like if you buy a vinyl record, sometimes they throw a download card inside the record, which I love. What I love beyond that is when you go and put that code in on the website, they let you pick the format that you can get the files in. And if you let me download those files as WAV or FLAC or Apple lossless, I will love you forever.
Yes, we are spoiled for choice now, and it's kind of a bummer. Sometimes you get an album and it says, go get the digital download, and it's a 320 MP3. I think the last vinyl that I bought was Alter Bridge. What was the newest Alter Bridge album? And I was super excited to go download the digital file version, and it was only available as a 320 kilobit per second MP3, which is the highest bit rate you can do for MP3, so that was great. But I loaded the song into my audio software because I always look at the frequency spectrum when I'm playing, especially in MP3, to see if they've done the whole high and low shelf, where usually in a high shelf they'll cut it. It'll be a cliff at like 16K or 18K, and it doesn't go all the way up to 20. I'm like, why did you do it as a 320 MP3 and cut out the last 4 kilohertz of information? What's the point there? I'm glad I have the vinyl. I'll do my own
I'm
rip.
not about to like pretend that I can easily hear the difference between like a 320K MP3 and lossless audio.
No.
I just like having the lossless because it's kind of future proof.
Right, exactly. So I think that about wraps it up. Colin, thank you so much for coming on Geek Therapy Radio again. Tell us about where people can go find you.
Yep, I'm on YouTube, youtube.com/thisdoesnotcompute, Twitter and Instagram as well, @thisdoesnotcomp. I do videos on just all sorts of geeky topics. And, it's all a lot of fun.
My eternal thanks to Colin for coming on again. Go check out geektherapyradio.com for more information. Visit my friends at Best Automotive in Kingwood on North Park to take care of your classic or modern car. And remember, we are all geeks about something, and you are loved.